good afternoon to everyone, and welcome to St. David's School. I see a lot of familiar faces, but we may have some visitors here as well. And this is our final speaker series event of the 2020-21 school year. We were just reflecting on what a unique year it's been, of course, but we've had a great lineup of speakers join us throughout the year. We started the year with Nori Panisi on supporting our athletes through the COVID year. We had Kevin Guskowitz and Peter Hans from UNC, Chancellor Woodson most recently from State. We've had members from the Fed and Federal Reserve Bank. We've had distinguished directors of some of our cultural institutions in our state, the North Carolina Symphony, National Humanities Center. We've had a couple of Christian counselors that came to chat with our parents a little bit just about anxiety among students. And we've also had some distinguished alums recently in our Simply Speaking event. So it's been a great speaker series year. And we're thankful and honored this afternoon to have Susan King and KELCEY CARLSON with us. So welcome to you both, and thank you for taking the time out of your busy day jobs to be here with us today. And welcome to each of you guests, especially to our current students, our seniors in particular, St. David's alums who are on the call or who will join the call, and just all of our other guests of the school. We're grateful to be gathered here today, even virtually, for what I know will be an opportunity for rich dialogue. Our speaker series is designed to bring our students, in particular our seniors, into direct conversation with leaders in various fields, government, public service, the arts, obviously journalism today, and business, economics, higher ed. As I mentioned yesterday in a note to our community, our faculty, staff, and parent community, the speaker series really presents a unique opportunity to our school to open up some space for substantive and civil public discourse. The kind that invites us to listen carefully to each other and even to divergent voices at times that may challenge us. So there are sadly not a lot of examples of that sort of thing that I'm aware of that are happening successfully. But we know it's possible. We know it's possible at St. David's, and it's important. It's actually critically important to our students to see this sort of thing modeled. Because a key priority of our work at St. David's for our students is to equip them to think, to truly think, to write, to debate, to listen, to genuinely engage ideas, big and small, in ways that are discerning and perceptive, and that's hard work. So we know that our topic today in particular is a difficult topic, one around which there's uniquely heightened sensitivity, especially at the present moment. So we realize there are different perspectives and different life experiences and insights that while they may not always, there may not always be broad agreement about them, even within our own community. We can listen and engage charitably and learn from each other. So we're thankful that we're able to enter into that. And I know that our students on the call today will have a chance to experience that firsthand with our distinguished and professional guests. So without further ado, Dr. Greggs, I'll hand it over to you to formally introduce our guests. And I'll just say one last opportunity to say welcome to everyone. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hillegas. Welcome everyone to the annual KELCEY CARLSON Symposium. And I want to begin with a slight short history of this symposium. KELCEY first came to the senior seminar in the fall of 2012. She just followed Holden Thorpe, who had come the week before. And then Dr. Amandi followed her visit in. She had such a good time, she came back that spring of 2013. And we decided then that we would try to hold an annual event in the senior seminar in which we discuss how a journalist handled ethical problems. We began by taking a look at photographs that are difficult to look at, many of which won the Pulitzer Prize, asking, could you run this on a front page of a newspaper? Could you show it on the evening news? We had a wonderful discussion, and then the first annual, that is the second event in the KELCEY CARLSON Symposium, brought Susan King to the campus on a panel discussion with Don Curtis and John Drescher, who was the executive editor of the News and Observer at the time. John is now at the Washington Post, and Dave Crabtree from WRAL. In the meantime, KELCEY had moved to Minneapolis, Minnesota, to take a job anchoring the evening news at KMSP Fox TV 9 in Minneapolis, St. Paul. She's come back every year, either virtually, most often in person. Even when she was pregnant, she returned to do the seminar. And this year is no exception. She's back again with us, and her special guest is Susan King, who I'll introduce in just a moment. As we were getting ready for this year's topic, Susan and I were exchanging emails and Kelsey, and we were talking about which headline from 2021 should we pick? Should it be the election, which is fascinating and interesting? Should it be the pandemic, a once in a century health problem? Should it be the storming of the Capitol on January the 6th? Or should it be the George Floyd, Derek Chauvin story that unfolded in Minneapolis? And Susan and I, in one email, thought, and this is harder for Kelsey because she's in Minneapolis, we thought that the story of the year really is this Floyd story and the Chauvin trial. So what we wanted to do today is we realized that when we say these phrases, even social justice, Derek Chauvin, George Floyd, people immediately want to line up on one side or the other and have a debate or an argument or a discussion. We understand that, and people can bring their passions and opinions, that's fine. But really what we want to do today is take apart the obligations of a journalist in covering a story like this. And it turns out that Kelsey's at the heart of this. She's been in Minneapolis reporting the evening news every night for the last year. And she's going to tell us what this has been like. But let me begin with introductions. That's the frame of the discussion. I want to introduce Susan King. Susan King became the dean of the University of North Carolina Hussman School of Journalism and Media in January of 2012, where she is also the school's John Thomas Carr Distinguished Professor of Journalism. I want you to listen carefully to this. Susan's career has spanned the school's two major disciplines, that is journalism and strategic communication and media. After starting in broadcast journalism in Buffalo, New York, she spent more than 20 years in Washington, D.C. as the anchor and reporter covering politics, including serving as the White House correspondent for ABC Evening News. She also reported for CBS, NBC, and CNN. And she's hosted the Diane Rehm Show frequently and Talk of the Nation on National Public Radio. Susan then worked for 5 years in the United States Department of Labor as the Assistant Secretary for Public Affairs and as the Executive Director of Family and Medical Leave Commission. We have Susan to thank for great family leave policies today. And she'll maybe say a little bit about that at the end. In 1999, she joined the Carnegie Foundation or the Carnegie Corporation in New York City as Vice President for External Affairs. She launched and led the Carnegie Knight Initiative on the Future of Journalism Education in collaboration with the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, along with 10 major US schools of journalism, and worked closely with one of my heroes, Vartan Gregorian. Susan serves on numerous boards, including the BBC Media Action, North Carolina Public Radio, the Carnegie Council on Ethics and International Affairs, and at her alma mater, Fairfield University in Fairfield, Connecticut. She received the DeWitt Carter-Reddick Award for Communication Excellence from the Moody College of Communication in 2015, and was inducted into the Buffalo Broadcasters Hall of Fame in 2014. Susan was awarded the 2018 Earl Gluck Distinguished Service Award by the North Carolina Association of Broadcasters. Susan, welcome to the seminar. And now I want to introduce Kelsey. You also see in front of you KELCEY CARLSON. Kelsey was born in Lafayette, Indiana. She left the Purdue country of Purdue Boilermakers and went to the University of Indiana, where she majored in journalism with a concentration in political science and a minor in French. When she got out of college, she moved to South Carolina, where she got her first job in Florence and Myrtle Beach market for a CBS affiliate, WBTW. She worked the weekend and was quickly promoted. For her first 2 months, she covered the crash of TWA 800 and hurricanes Bertha and Fran. She earned a position as a reporter and photographer, shooting and editing her own stories for the daily newscast. Then she was hired by WWMT in Kalamazoo, Michigan, where she was first assigned at a very big story, the Bush-Gore campaign and election, and in Miami Beach. She covered that story in West Palm Beach. She also met her husband, Dave, I think, in Kalamazoo. Is that right, Kelsey?
Yes.
All right, good. I'm not quite finished. Here we go. Much of her career, though, was spent here in Raleigh at WRAL. and hired initially as a reporter. She moved on to the anchor of the weekend news broadcast and then the weekday morning show, where many of you may remember her. Kelsey covered many big stories here, including Hurricane Isabel that devastated the southern Outer Banks. She also covered the Duke lacrosse scandal story and the John Edwards case at the time. She was also running marathons. Kelsey is a marathon runner. She's run, is this right, 31 marathons?
Yeah,
Can that be right? All right, she's run 31 marathons, including the Boston Marathon in 2013, when bombs went off. And after finishing the marathon, she was getting ready to leave Boston and got the call that she had to cover the story. And one of the most amazing stories I've ever seen, she was able to pull herself together after running 26.2 miles and report to us about what was happening in Boston. As I mentioned, in her free time, she likes to run. She's run 31 marathons, 7 Boston marathons, 3 of which she qualified under the men's timing standard. She's also run in Chicago and Berlin and Grandma's Marathon and won the marathon at Grandfather Mountain. So please welcome Kelsey CARLSON to the senior seminar at St. David's. Welcome, Kelsey.
Thank you.
Now, Kelsey, before we take up this very serious subject, which we're going to do in just a second, I got 2 emails this morning from 2 of my students, and one of them had a picture that we want to put up. This is Jade Gordon, who's a senior graduating, and here she is. I don't know how many years ago this is, Jade, maybe 10 years ago. I think, Kelsey, this must be at the fair. It looks to me like it might be.
It might be at the fair. It might have been in the studio too.
Mm-hmm.
I can't quite figure out the background because we did have we had a picture like that at the fair as well. But so Jade's dad, Jeff Gordon, was the public information officer for State Patrol. And this picture immediately just brought back this wonderful memory of talking to Jade's dad in the newsroom when he came in for a morning interview. He was getting ready to run what I think, Jade, was the Walt Disney Marathon. And I may not have that correct because it was so many years ago, but I remember we were talking about that. And he was just extremely accessible and wonderful to work with. And this picture just warmed my heart this morning.
Thank you, Kelsey. And Jade, I don't know if you're out there, if you can click your camera. Maybe Emily can do it. I don't know. But if so, go ahead. But if not, we're going to move on here as we go through it. Kelsey, let's start with you if we can. What a year this has been. I mean, a year plagued by an epidemic that no one has ever seen, that's still ravaging places like India. It's out of control. It's disrupted school. It's disrupted meetings. It's disrupted business. There was a controversial election. There was the storming of the Capitol in January. And the Floyd trial, or the Derek Chauvin trial, which just concluded a couple of weeks ago, brings the whole issue back up to us. It's been a year long. Can you take us back? How did the story break, and what was it like to be in Minneapolis and to try to cover this and report on it every night?
Sure, and I'll try to be brief because there's a lot to unpack here. There's a lot to this year. And I also just want to say a quick thank you for having me. St. David's is a wonderful school. I'm so honored to be here and to be with Susan. I mean, I have so much to thank because of Susan. She has blazed the trail for all women to be in the workforce and women in journalism to be out there. So I am incredibly honored to be part of this panel with her, and just to share a conversation or an email with Susan every once in a while is just a wonderful thing. So all you young women out there, I want you to take a minute to appreciate what Susan has done for all of us in the workforce. So being in Minneapolis, it's been, as you said, Gil, it's been a challenging year because we have so many big things going on here. We have the global pandemic. And if you think about that for a moment and just do an aerial view of what has happened to our planet because of a virus, and it came in like a freight train. I mean, it was, if you think back to last March, everything changed and happened so quickly, and everything shuttered so quickly. So that was challenge number one. Plus, we were in the middle of a very big political year. So you have all of that going on. And then on Memorial Day of last year, we have what happened to George Floyd. And I can kind of walk you back just to what it was like being here. I worked that Monday night. We did not know about it on that Monday night. We found out about it on early the next morning. And the reason that we found out about it was because of a young girl named Darnella Frazier, who was on the street, who posted a cell phone video to Facebook. It was originally reported by Minneapolis police as a medical incident. It was not reported as an incident that was under investigation, but George Floyd's death was initially, a press release was issued that it was a medical incident. Darnella Frazier's video, though, caused everybody to stop and start asking questions. And so I remember, because I work at night, I had an appointment the next morning, and I pulled up my phone, and it was about 8 o'clock in the morning, and the video was everywhere. And trying to piece together what happened. I remember that meeting that we had at 1:30, of course, via Zoom. I was still working from home at the time because I was we only had maybe 10 people that were allowed in the building when we closed because of the pandemic. So everything was via Zoom at that point. And what we do as journalists is we start asking questions. Our job is to not jump to any conclusions, which can be very hard to do because sometimes something looks like one thing and it might be another. We sort of have a rule in the newsroom is you don't know what you don't know. And so we all were carefully trying to think of every question that we could possibly ask, because at that point we didn't have body camera video, we didn't have surveillance video from across the street. We had one clip that was on Facebook. So what are the pieces that we don't have of this puzzle? And that's so important for journalists to ask. And I remember what my questions were, and I think working all those years at WRAL and working on some very difficult and big stories helps me to be a better question asker. And I went through my list. I actually wrote down a list on a pad of paper, and I said, okay, did anybody call 911? Because my first thought was, something happened here. People on the street will call 911 on the police. So I said, let's ask for all the 911 calls and see if anybody actually called, and then what they said to the dispatcher about what was happening on the street. Do we know anybody who knows this man? Because I don't think we had a name at that point. I said, do we know of anybody who knows him, who can talk about what was happening earlier in that day? What was the time of death? What happened before this? What was he being arrested for? And what happened before we saw this video? And then what happened once the paramedics took him away? And so we started from that small place. And then gradually, as the days and months went by, the body camera was released, the charges were filed. Of course, in the immediate days that followed his death, we had riots in the street that gradually got worse each night. Tuesday was just a small gathering of people outside the 3rd Police Precinct. And then Wednesday, we had an auto zone that was set on fire. By Thursday, the 3rd Precinct was burning to the ground. And by Friday, we had the governor getting involved and saying that we're bringing in the National Guard. It was a situation that the city of Minneapolis was not prepared for and did not know how to handle. And then it also became political, because you have the president weighing in, saying that he's going to send in military. And so if you can imagine being in the middle of this, and literally, as we're watching the 3rd Precinct burn, and I'm seeing people running out the back door of the 3rd Precinct and not knowing if anybody was inside, it is one of the most traumatic things, I think. It's got to be the most traumatic thing to ever happen to this area. I remember we were doing phone interviews with both mayors in those nights of unrest, in the riots and the fires and the looting. And I just think they were so scared about what could potentially happen to their city. And also, what do you do? What do you do? Because this was an issue with Minneapolis police. And the difficult decision for the mayors of St. Paul and Minneapolis, do you bring in police when they're the ones that are being questioned right now? How do we restore order when you have these questions about accountability for the Minneapolis Police Department and how to handle it. So I think this was a really unprecedented thing for the city to have to deal with. In the end, 1,500 businesses were either vandalized, partially destroyed, or destroyed. The third precinct never came back. Banks were burned to the ground. And violent crime has been up in this city because the police department, the Minneapolis Police Department, has been under fire so much that hundreds of officers have taken medical leave or early retirement. And then the city council has also, there are certain members of the city council who have asked for the city to defund and change the way that police work is done in this city. So we're very much in a situation right now where the earth is moving under our feet. There is change afoot, but because of the pandemic, it's really hard to have meaningful communication and to pull people together in meaningful ways. So it's been this constant barrier to try to move forward. Plus, change takes time, and we have the immediate emergencies that we have to deal with. There was the trial and setting up security for the trial and what that would look like and how much police force would be acceptable in this city when you're dealing with crowds of mostly peaceful protesters. These are very difficult decisions. Yeah. And there's so many layers to all of these issues. You can't just say it should be one way or the other. There's so much in the middle that exists in all of this. But I will say this is a city that is built on heavy activism. There were groups of people long ago asking for police accountability, asking questions, pushing for body cameras before body cameras were really a thing. And because of that, you have people in this city that will stop with their cell phone. And if something doesn't look right, they'll start taking video. They'll start asking questions. And so if you take a situation like George Floyd 10, 20 years ago, you might only have what one person says versus what another person says. In this trial, we had an unprecedented amount of video. I've never seen a criminal trial that had this much video. You had the surveillance video from all the businesses across the street. You had the surveillance video from inside the grocery store. You had all the cell phone video of the people on the street. You could hear Charles McMillan, the 61-year-old man who stopped to try to talk to George Floyd. You could hear Donald Williams, the MMA fighter. You could see Darnella Frazier. You could see the off-duty firefighter who stopped to try to help. And you have all the body cameras of the officers as well. And you have a city where people didn't just walk on by. They have all of that video. So I think this is a place where people certainly do want to come together. That is my impression. And I say that as a transplant, where people do want to come together. They want to know how we can move forward as a community. And I will say that you hear that from the law enforcement community as well. 2 weeks ago, when we had additional protests because of another police shooting, the sheriff got up during a midnight press conference, and the first thing he said was, "We need to do better." I know we need to do better, but we have to heal as a community too. So in a nutshell, that has been the year. Wow. Of course, made more challenging by businesses pulling out of downtown because people can work from home, and not having the sports culture where people go downtown for a game because you can't have a live audience, and the challenges of the pandemic that we all feel, where we're working on our own personal survival, and it's hard to work toward a bigger cause when you have all of these additional challenges with COVID that you're just trying to get through the day.
Kelsey, that's amazing. Let me get Susan here in the conversation. And Susan, I want to see if you can reflect a little bit about, you've done this for a very long time. And I'm old enough to remember when the evening news was brought to us by Walter Cronkite and Frank Reynolds and Huntley and Brinkley, Eric Severide, Howard K. Smith. I remember the Chicago Convention of 1968. This story, Susan, how is it like those stories, other stories, or not? How is it unique, and or how does it compare to stories that you've covered, something like this in the past? Any comparison at all?
Well, first of all, it's really satisfying for me to hear Kelsey tell us the story as it unfolded there, because we all got into the story probably the week later. So it's really interesting for you all to hear and me to hear how it developed in that community. I want to say just first two things that I'll hope will answer. One, about values. And I think those values of journalism, the great values of journalism, have not changed. And then second, context, which is social media, both, Twitter and all that, as well as the changing, internet environment, which does change the Cronkite era. Walter Cronkite era is gone. But first, in terms of values, what we teach here is about reporting. So what you heard Kelsey talk about was a newsroom of people being focused on getting the facts and reporting and trying to understand what had happened. There's a whole area of journalism which has dominated recent years, and particularly our partisan era, which I think is editorial. So that could be cable at night, Fox different than MSNBC versus very different than CNN. But we're talking about reporting. And so that what we talk about it here is the Hussman values. Walter Hussman, old newspaper guy, our graduate. We want to be impartial. We want to be objective. Well, that phrase, that word has, is got a lot of baggage with it. And the third thing is we have to serve the public. But we are there not to tell you what we think, but to tell you what we learn. And one of the phrases I love that are on our wall is we cover the news and we uncover the news. So in the first couple of days, you may not have it all uncovered. You get it. So context. I'm going to say something about social media, but I covered police, what was called police brutality in my first years at Washington as a local reporter. And there was one county outside of DC where there were a very large number of police shootings and brutal kind of incidents. What do we have? We had a family talk about their loved one who was either killed or beaten or something. And you had the police. That's what you had. The world has changed because of this phone. Because now citizens also have access to the public and to the media. And the lecture that I give here is called Journalism 2.0, because we are not simply the gatekeepers. Walter Cronkite and those other great journalists of that time were the gatekeepers for what America could learn. Now we have to interact with the citizens. And I think the George Floyd incident was so powerful because there was uncut video that wonderful young woman, Darnell Frazier, took. She had such a steady hand. I'm always amazed when I see that. So, plus you have social media for good or bad. Citizens have access to the internet and we as journalists can hear their voice in a way maybe we couldn't have heard before. So we can follow up. But you can also have a lot of people also abuse it and get into a very partisan kind of fight. So we're in a different context. And when you ask what our obligation, if you are in local media, your obligation is to help your citizens understand what is going on in their community. Not to tell them what you think should happen, but try to uncover every fact so we are smarter as a result, and then try to find maybe some common ground for people to talk. But boy, is that hard.
Wow, that's so well said. Kelsey, do you have some thoughts about that? Those are great comments.
Yeah, I will say, Susan put it together so well there. Our job is to get to the bottom line there, the facts, the information, not to share our opinion. And it is the waters have been so muddied because there's a lot of opinion television out there that sort of disguises itself as sort of a news operation. And really it's editorial, it's commentary. But local news, our job is to get you the information, because it can be very blurry out there in social media and what you hear in that sort of commentary world. Our job is to get you to the facts of what happened. And you know what, we had something here, it's very common in North Carolina to televise a trial. Cameras are routinely allowed in courtrooms in North Carolina, not so much in Minnesota. But for the first time in history, a criminal trial was televised, and it was the Derek Chauvin trial. And so we chose, along with one other television station in the market, to televise the trial, not just stream it on YouTube or on the web, but to put it on our channel each and every day. And then we had a group of legal analysts, people who do criminal trial work, public defenders, and every day we had 2 or 3 legal analysts that would help us understand the lingo of the courtroom, help us understand what the prosecution was doing, help us understand what the defense attorneys are doing. And that is true transparency. We need that sort of sunshine to understand what we can. The alternative would be for us to do a 1.5-minute summary of what happened in court today. It's better for people to be able to actually see the process with their own eyes and to understand it. So that is our mission. Journalism is getting harder and harder because there is so much chatter out there. It's hard to tell what end is up sometimes, but I think our mission is more important than it's ever been before. And I believe in local news, and I believe in our mission. But it, like Susan said, it will be challenging. It will continue to be challenging, and it's hard for people out there to discern what's going on.
Kelsey, I like that last sentiment that you expressed about the importance of local news. I'm a big believer in this. You may know that Tom Wolfe, the novelist, who covered stories, a journalist as well, and he wrote novels later. He said his friends, when he started out in journalism, all wanted to cover the Defense Department or the State Department. He wanted to cover local county news. And he said he did because he thought the real stories were always local. And one of the reasons that this topic jumped out at us this year, for obvious reasons, but really the beautiful thing is you're in Minneapolis and you've just narrated some things that I haven't heard on the news at all. It's just wonderful to hear that side of that local focus that you have. Susan, do you have thoughts about, as this story developed, how complex did it get? And what becomes the headline on a story like this as it unfolds? It's changed several times, hasn't it?
Yes, I do want to make sure that we also share with the students that we are going to be experiencing here through RAL, KELCEY's alma mater, and the other stations in town, plus the NNO, a local news story in Elizabeth City that is just starting to unfold, the underground. And we don't have the police video. And it was great to hear you, Kelsey, say that you didn't have that police camera video to start either. So, again, we'll be experiencing this, I think, as a community. But did the first one was, I think that, there was, you said it best, Kelsey, that this was a medical issue rather than, a man dying at the hands of at the police. That wasn't it. That became certainly the headline. Black man killed again, because it wasn't the first, and we had a series of incidents. The difference in this one was there was that long video, and so people really witnessed it in all its pain. And Kelsey, if your first hearing here at St. David's was around, do pictures that are difficult to be seen, even if they won Pulitzer Prize, do they deserve to be in front of the public? We have all seen that video to the point where maybe we're even immune to it. Right. But the second story became, who is he? And that's also something for the students to watch in any trial or anything that's being, in a way, prosecuted in real time in the news. Was this man a drug dealer? Was this man a petty thief? Who was this man? And then is that really critical to his death? And then I would say the police. I started seeing a different side when I saw some stories about police unions and incidents over many years of police getting off for incidents that might be questionable. I'm not an anti-union person, but the union had been protecting maybe good cops and bad cops, so that I realized this was, as you say, a very layered, Kelsey, and very complicated story. So there are phases that journalists know happen, particularly now in cases around, because it's happened so often in the last year and a half, Black, particularly men, being killed when they meet,
right,
for some reason or another, authority in sheriffs or police. And so there are different phases we know will surface.
Let me just note that Newsweek had reported that since the George Floyd incident last May, do I have that date right, Kelsey? Was it in May?
May 25th.
May 25th.
Last Memorial Day.
Since May 25th, 181 Black Americans have been killed by police officers since May 25th. That's just a fact. Now, what are the circumstances? As Susan says, what is the context? All of that requires an investigation. I'm sure local places are doing that. And she's mentioning this, the problem we have in Elizabeth City. It seems to me, yeah, we don't have the facts. Is that right? Like in the first week of the Floyd incident, how long did it take before you began to sort of see that the shape of the story was easier to define? Did it take a while to get the facts?
I'm trying to think, because of this COVID year, I mean, you still have to remind yourself what day of the week it is. Every month almost seems the same. So I'm trying to put a timeline together in my head. Things happened pretty rapidly because the charges were filed pretty quickly. But I want to say even then, because by nature, my job is not to jump to any conclusions. So it wasn't really until the trial that we had all of that information where we could really get all of the pieces together, hear expert testimony, and really see the case in a full picture. I mean, to the point where you had, because of the amount of videotape, you had the medical experts who could say, this is the moment he died. This is when he no longer had air. So, but it can take months, it can take even years sometimes to get a lot of video, because the police and judges can keep video under seal. So it really is sort of a local jurisdiction decision, because this ended up being such a big case that the entire world was watching. There was an urgency to expedite all of this information and get it out there. I mean, the police chief immediately distanced himself from Derek Chauvin. They fired him immediately and said, this is not what we do. And, and I will say, as many stories as I've covered, I didn't know what was allowed when you're subduing or trying to put somebody in custody. And I wasn't sure if that was a sanctioned move or not. We had to lean on our law enforcement experts to tell us, this is not something that you do in training ever. And then you heard that in the trial too, about how you're supposed to put somebody on their side, because when they are pushed down like that, you literally cannot get air. It's an unsafe move. So, these were all questions that we had to ask in the very beginning, and it can take some time. Back in the day before body cameras, it was even more difficult, because sometimes you just had a dash cam, which really couldn't tell you much. If somebody was just in front of the car for a few fleeting seconds, you couldn't see everything. But those body cameras have really been a big game changer.
Mm-hmm. Susan, you mentioned something I wanted to pick up on. That is the notion that we had seen the replay of the cell phone video so often that it began to lose, in some sense, its power. Could you say a little bit more about that? I'm thinking back to 9/11. I remember Laura Bush asking people to turn their televisions off just because we were watching those towers go up in flames every 3 minutes. What happens when we see something like that over and over and over again?
Well, I feel like that's a step above my pay grade. Psychologists are really studying this, and I've certainly read that. And there is this sense that we become numbed to the horror of what we're watching. And that's part of, even games, that have violent kind of activities. So it's a big discussed area that I'm probably not as equipped from. At the same time, as a news person, I feel like we can't remove from ourselves the reality of what we have to see. What I'm always interested in as a journalist is to understand how a story is understood by a community. So one personal note, when I was a student, Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy were shot within one semester. And I happened to be living abroad, and people said to me, you're an American, what's going on in your country? And that was the time when I said to myself, I am going to be a journalist, because I want to understand my country. I want to understand what's going on. And more than that, I want to share it with people. But again, I never wanted to give my opinion. I wanted to keep scraping to understand the changes going on in the country.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the moments when you ask what the changes are. We were in the middle, this last summer was a really Twitter feed crazy political moment too, that, you know, the country was being whipsawed at times among about ideas and about incidents and about stories, and everything became very politicized, which is why I think sometimes hard to understand it. And as a journalist, I heard one, you know, Sunday talk show saying, are the reporters covering these city after city after city protests, you know, just a bunch of liberals covering it, are they being objective? Because there was violence, you know, yet there was also very civil protest.
Right.
And so somebody sort of said, really, you who's objective? And some newsrooms said Black reporters can't cover them. And then I heard one woman, Black reporter on CNN say, who is objective? Only white people to cover this? That took me right, you know, after all the reading I've done, all the experience I've had, that went right to my core, you know, who it is. So that's why here we really try to equip our students with that sense of what their purpose should be. And I'll just end by saying, I was the first woman in every newsroom I was at. Did that mean I couldn't cover women's stories? I didn't want to only cover women's stories. Was I objective? I would always give a speech and say, I'm biased in one thing. I think women are smart and I want to hear their voice. But otherwise, I might go out and interview KELCEY before I'll interview you, Gil, because I wanted voices of women in my stories. But I came trying to be a good reporter who helped you understand what was going on in your town. And now more than ever, in the cacophony of social media and prime time cable television, which is just a cacophony of bombast.
Right. Right. Yeah. One side being more outraged than the other, as though it's entertaining and informative somehow, and it's neither, is it? KELCEY, what about that? Is there still a role? What is the role for an independent press in the political life of the country in getting to the facts of the story? I mean, how important is this?
It's vital for our future. And I will say, when Susan, when you said your desire to understand is what made you want to be a journalist, I feel the exact same way. I am one of those people, I just constantly want to keep digging to get at, and I want to understand every person. There's not one side or another side. There's so many sides. And I just love human beings, and I love trying to understand an issue or understand why people say or do certain things. And so, okay, Gil, go back to your question again. I'm sorry. I went back to what Susan was talking about.
No, that's great. It's the same thing about what is the role of the independent press now in American democracy? Is it more vital than ever? Or is it been cynically cast so that everybody is accused of having a bias that they can't somehow set aside?
We're in a bit of crisis as well as an industry. And I think about it a lot, because I think the role of an independent press is so much more important than it's ever been, because there's so much information out there and you don't know if it's legitimate. You don't know if it's been put in context. You don't know if it's completely made up. There's so many avenues for people to speak. It's not like, you know, back 200 years ago where somebody who had an opinion could go stand on a street corner and 5 people heard it and that was it. I mean, the way that the political machine is able to use media is fascinating and frightening at the same time. When you unpack in the 2016 election, when there were outside entities trying to influence our election from overseas, I listened to a podcast that unraveled one of these incidents, and a group from overseas found a couple of people in Florida to do sort of a pop-up protest. And really they were paid to do this, and they didn't question it because the people believed in the cause. They got about 20 people to show up. But the key to that gathering was having one person in a cage with a sign, and the picture that was taken and posted on social media was seen millions of times. So those images are so powerful. And so to cut through all of the information that is out there, we need a press, but as an industry, we have a lot of work to do. And I don't know how we get to a better place, but we have so much editorial and commentary based shows and media that it makes us all look like we're in that batch of journalists.
Go ahead.
I just want to add one thing for students, because I feel the students of St. David's are going to be the leaders of North Carolina and far.
Right. That's
we
right.
are in a time of real change in this country. So one of the things I would ask them to look at too, which is why sometimes we in the media are caught in that, we have been a majority white country and a majority white state. That is changing. Right now in North Carolina, they say by 2050, we will no longer be a majority white state. So as we as a country wrestle with our values and who we are and the changing demographics, there'll be some moments of real tension. And I think we just have to understand that as citizens committed to our community and try to understand that, and why KELCEY's commitment to trying to understand all sides of the story and perspectives is the only way we can all grow as a community, because we're not just the community that I grew up in, it's much more complex.
Right. That's right. We're coming to the end here, and I want to give you each a chance to say sort of what Susan just did, KELCEY, but what advice do you have to young men and women graduating in the year 2021 as they think about their careers, but especially about being citizens of the Republic? How should they go about securing the facts, forming opinions, getting the news?
Well, I would say number one, don't jump to conclusions. Really think about where you're hearing that information from and whether or not you believe that's a reliable source. And if your gut tells you, maybe there's more to this, never stop asking questions. That applies to gossip in the hallways, and that applies to the stories that you're seeing on social media. In life, don't jump to conclusions. You don't know what you don't know. And that would be my best advice. And then, I think it's always good to do a personal audit. One of the first things that we did at the television station after George Floyd was we started a committee with people from all the departments. We called it Voices for Change. And we talked about how we're going to audit ourselves. What are we putting on the air? What stories are we putting on the air? How many experts do we talk to who are people of color? How much can we change? Do we have a list of experts that are people of color, women? Every time we go do a story on, let's say, transportation, are we talking to the same white male professor at the University of Minnesota? And so, we had to think, we had to carefully think about what we're showing on the news and what stories we're choosing to do. How involved are we getting in the community? And we do a lot of projects to give back as part of our creative services and promotions department. Well, what projects are we choosing? And we did some shifting, and we did some auditing of ourselves, and we did some sharing. The first two meetings were all about employees just sharing some of their life experience. And that was an important check and balance that we needed to do. And I really credit my general manager with heading that up, because I don't think the other television stations in the market have done something like that. And I think it's pretty unique. And I think it's something that could be copied everywhere.
Susan, I want to give you the last word here.
Make it really short. I'm going to just say you're all on the cusp of going on to college and that kind of thing. Make sure that you meet someone, learn from someone who is different than you. I went to an all-girls Catholic high school. Okay, loved it. A school like yours, very highly, academic, but pretty much universal. We had a lot of the same things. When I met people who were different, I felt like I learned so much from them. So make sure when you go to your next thing, that you meet friends with people that have different experiences, you education-wise or economic-wise or race-wise or geographic-wise, because suck it all up. You're the leaders of tomorrow, and that's a heavy burden. I'm going to be an old person depending on you to take our country into a better place. So thanks.
What a wonderful way to bring this discussion to an end. I want to thank KELCEY Carlson and Susan King for giving up some time to come and join us today. And let me say that if you're willing to do it again, KELCEY, next year, I've called Jen Psaki, the White House press secretary, to ask if she would join us next year. And we may know soon if that's possible. Susan, you're invited to come back too. if that happens. We'd like to have you. So let me say thank you on behalf of the St. David's community. Thank you so very much. And if you could hear us all, we'd be applauding right now.
Thank you.
Yeah. Great to
Thank
see
you
you,
all.
Kelsey.
You too, Susan.
Thank you guys for coming.
All right. Gil,
Thanks.
good luck with that grandbaby.
Yeah, I'll let you know. I'll send a picture any moment now. I think I may get the call. If you guys want to stay on for a bit, that's okay. If you have to run, we also understand. Whatever you'd like to do.
Well, I'll just say, Susan, it's so great to see you. It's so great to hear your voice. And I could listen to you talk for hours.
Yeah.
And UNC is so very, very lucky to have you.
Yeah.
You are literally changing lives there with the work that you're doing at UNC. And we need good journalists. There are times when I do worry about the future of our business because so much of it has gone to the opinion-based entertainment.
Yeah.
And I worry that, I know people personally who they can't figure it all out, and everything is so loud and confusing that they won't pick up a magazine, they won't pick up a newspaper, they won't turn on the news at all. And when you're completely disengaged, that's a real problem for a country.
Yeah.
Totally agree. I will just say that we have more journalism, more people thinking about journalism right now than we have had. So that's a real positive. But I totally agree with you because they want to just turn off. And it is it's been a hard couple of years because we've lost the trust of the public and we have to build that back, So, but I thought of you during this whole last year, and I wondered how it was going out there. And I'm just so glad to hear the way you did the scenario for us of how it evolved. It's just thrilling for me to hear it and from you. And I always knew you were going to leave.
That's right. I remember the discussion we had in your office when we were all chatting about this, that Kelsey should be on the national level. I agree.
No, I'm not at that level, but
You are at that level, but you've chosen a different way of life, and it sounds like a good one for you and your family. And important one for communities. We know we need more in local news. This is a hard place. This is where our emphasis is here, local news.
Yeah. Let me thank you both. I'll let you chat, but I'm going to have to run to teach. But I want to thank you both for your work. And I want to say this. I think North Carolina, where I live, is better because of the two of you. And that's not a hallmark sentiment. That's true. And I know that when you speak to my students, it does change their life. So thank you both. It really
Thank you. Good luck. Kelsey, see you next year.
God bless.
Okay,
guys.
Susan. Bye-bye.